Okay, one of the distinctions that I think is not made often enough in Western esotericism is a distinction between magic and occultism. Very often people act as though if you're an occultist, well, of course you're out there practicing lots of ceremonial magic. But in fact, this is not the case. There's an entire body of occult tradition, a very substantial body, that is not, especially in modern occultism within the last, say, 250 years, that has very little to do with ritual magic, that focuses on other modes of practice and has other goals. And while I certainly would be the last person to downplay ceremonial magic to anyone who wants to practice it, it's not the only game in town. Some of you, for all I know, some of you may be initiates of old-fashioned occult orders of the sort that I'm talking about, where the only rituals that are typically practiced are initiation rituals, and you're spending most of your time engaging in study, meditation, and perhaps divination. This was the standard approach to occultism for many years, and it became very popular, certainly around the time I was getting involved in the 1970s. It became very popular for people to look down their noses at that. No, we've got the well, as it was then, the Blue Book of Rigardi. We've got the brick, and we have all the ceremonial magic, or we have Crowley, or we have what have you. We're going to do lots and lots of ritual, which is fine, but it may not be complete, and it may not always work very well. The older occult tradition, well, let me back up a little bit here. In Dion Fortune's writings, she was fond of drawing a distinction between what she considered the occult and the mystic way. Okay, and she would talk about occultism is motivated by, is works with ritual, and it's working with power, where the mystical path is working primarily with prayer and contemplation, and it's motivated by love. It's not a complete taxonomy by any means, especially if you want to bring in traditions from other cultures. But that distinction between the ceremonial way of power and the mystical way of love is a valid one. It's just that, again, those aren't the only options. Many of the people in Fortune's own school were primarily practicing this third path, which I'm talking about, where I call occultism, as distinct from magic, where the keynote is not power, not love, but wisdom. And the basic practice is not ritual and not prayer, but meditation. Okay, where the goal of this mode of work is not to either to make the universe do what you want, the sort of ceremonial magic approach of calling up powers and extending your will into some aspect of creation and making it behave like an ill-behaved puppy. And it's also not simply attuning yourself to the divine in love and accepting whatever the divine happens to send you, however pleasant or unpleasant that happens to be. The occultist who seeks wisdom, who practices the meditative path, and often divination as well, is seeking wisdom and is seeking that sense of timing and of intuitive knowledge, where, if you will, where the magician will try to grab the apple tree and shake it to get an apple down, and the mystic simply sits peacefully at the apple tree and waits to see whether what lands on him is an apple or something the bird did. The occultist has that intuitive sense of walking right over here and going like this at the moment the apple's about to drop. Okay, so that was very well developed in a lot of the old correspondence schools, of which you had quite a few on this side of the Atlantic, and we had a hell of a lot over on my side. But it has received very little exposure in recent years. It was the center of the teachings that I received from my teacher, John Gilbert, who was an odd duck about whom we can talk a little later. And I decided, partly just because I felt it was time, and partly because after he passed away in 2021, and I took a number of his teachings and systematized them and got them out into circulation, mostly in under copyright-free arrangements, so people can simply benefit the community to have some more structured introduction to this kind of occultism. And that's what gave rise to the Way of the Golden Section, the Way of the Four Elements, and eventually the Way of the Secret Temple. What I've tried to do here is essentially call it an open source correspondence school, where you have these 3 books. There's 3 years of training. There are actually 3 other books, 2 of them in print now, one of them not quite. The Occult Philosophy Workbook, the Earth Mysteries Workbook, and the forthcoming Life Force Workbook. I'll explain those in a moment. But the idea is to create a coherent system of occult training, focusing on meditation and divination and occult study, that is available to anybody, whether or not you want to sign up for a correspondence course and fork over I don't know how many pounds a month for the benefit of the elderly custodians of sane. In this case, you simply have to buy 3 books or 6 books. You also need my divination deck, the Sacred Geometry Oracle. Now, why sacred geometry? Why did I focus this system around the symbolism of sacred geometry? Because I like sacred geometry. There's no profound, deep reason for that other than the fact that I felt that it's rather neglected and in the occult community these days, and so I thought, hey, why not use that as the basic gimmick here? Okay. And so that's what I did. Anyone who does the work of the first book, The Way of the Golden Section, becomes thereby a member of the Golden Section Fellowship. What does that mean? Do you get a membership card? Do you get a funny hat with a strange symbol on it? I have some of those. No, it does not mean any of these things. It means that you've done certain work, and if you happen to be interested in talking about it with other people who do the same thing, why, guess what? You can do this. Okay, so that's basically what this is about, an attempt to make a system of occult training within the terms that I've just used, readily accessible and readily available to anyone who's interested. Is it the only path in town? Of course not. I mean, we're all familiar with the kind of occult schools that says, my way or the highway, you have to, my way is the highway. You have to follow this path, and that's the only choice there is, and otherwise, you will be turned into a precious Mao button and distributed in the region of Thud. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? Okay, good. But that's not what I'm trying to do here. Again, this is a system of training. It is not the only game in town. It is compatible with some but not all of my other books. When anybody gets bored enough to start asking a question, and if anyone wants to know about that, I can certainly talk about what it is compatible with and what it is not compatible with. I mentioned earlier the Occult Philosophy Workbook, the Earth Mysteries Workbook, the Life Force Workbook. That again is a matter of here's something that these days doesn't get enough exposure within the occult community. The Earth Mysteries scene, I'm sure in this audience everyone's quite familiar with that. If I speak the dread name of John Michel, you probably, if any of you who are of my generation or older, probably still have a battered copy of The View Over Atlantis sitting on your bookshelf. I certainly do. Mine is rather dog-eared, actually. And the whole Earth Mystery scene that unfolded from that, whether or not it reflects anything that was actually accurately historical about what was going on in Neolithic times, I don't claim to know. I wasn't there. But there are certainly some very interesting things moving in the land, certain energies in the land, certain qualities or effects or influences. There are a lot of interesting things that can be interfaced with occult study, but have not often been so interfaced. So, again, I decided, why not? These are 2 things that fascinate me. In the same way, the Life Force Handbook, working here with, well, the energy of a million names. Do you want to speak of orgone? Do you want to speak of animal magnetism? Would you prefer ode or vril? Or, well, the list goes on. We can get into the Chinese and Sanskrit and Hebrew names and so on. Everybody outside of modern Western industrial society knows perfectly well what the life force is. They talk about it constantly. They use it all the time. Our culture is irremediably stupid about that subject. Our culture is fixated on this notion that not only is there not a life force, there cannot be a life force, and if you even suggest that there is one, Richard Dawkins will appear on the spot to yell at you. Okay. Okay, you are still awake. Good. But, leaving aside the dread demon Dawkins and rights to evoke him, this is a normal part of human experience. It is a constant of human culture. It's very hard to find a language that does not have a common word for the life force, except for ours. And so that's another thing that integrates very well with occult study. Now, you know, again, it to some extent is one of my hobby horses. I do radionics, among other things, and all kinds of strange things. But there's a lot of fun that can be had and a lot of learning that can be interfaced with a system of occult training. And so those are all parts of that broader system. Again, the Life Force Handbook is not finished yet, which is the reason why you will not find it on the bookshelves. Okay, so that's phase. That's kind of what I was intending to say, and there are various people nodding and occasionally even smiling. What a concept! But before I go on, do you have any questions?
So I usually relate like life force management or moving energy with ritual magic. How do you interface meditation and the occultism as you're defining it with life force?
Easiest thing in the world. One of the main reasons we tend not to notice the life force in modern industrial society is that our minds are too full of jabber. If you quiet your mind, you will start noticing where the life force is pooling in your body, where it's blocked. This is why most healing arts that use the life force in other cultures include meditation as a matter of course. You're going to be doing this to develop that basic sensitivity. Once you have the sensitivity, the tools are easy. There's a wide range of them. And the Life Force Workbook does not focus on any specific set of tools. It is more a sort of general overview of concepts and manifestations and expressions that will allow you to take that and combine it with some specialized form of work with the life force if that interests you. So if you happen to be all agog to get a Hieronymus machine and start working with radionics, or you want to learn acupressure, or you want to learn some of the energetic aspects of herbalism, or we could go on for a week here. This tells you how to interface that with your occult training. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
It's almost as using the life force and meditation subjects and
it up. Well, it's one of
your perception.
One of the things. Each of these workbooks is divided. Is divided into 52 sections, each of which has 7 themes, and you're meditating on one of these themes every day for a year. That's how we go through. That's how we do these things. So they're basically a collection of meditation subjects, which are also subjects for study. There are exercises. There are points for reflection and various things like that.
So,
Yes.
Can I ask a question?
You can ask as many questions as you like.
Thank you very much.
It greatly simplifies.
You may regret that. Okay, so if I've understood correctly, and to put it in my words then, right, it seems to me that the way you're using the sort of term occultism and this occult training is in fact sensitizing yourself to a large and complex table of influences, right?
That would certainly be a good description, yes.
Okay, no, that's just to put it in terms that I get, because sort of my view on magical practice, occultism, blah 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 blah. I don't separate them into terms. The whole thing is like a question of like belief, using belief, finding sensitivities and making it go whichever way works for what you want to do. But it's like I like the way you frame it out, because I think it's quite important to, you can force the issue if you want. You can kick a door in, right?
Yes.
But if you just wait for 5 minutes, maybe someone opens it.
Alternatively,
maybe it's a far subtler and a more powerful practice to
alternatively, you may
maybe
notice there's a key sitting on the floor,
or maybe there isn't even a door. You can just walk around the corner.
Yeah, exactly. There's a door, or exactly, if you pay attention.
Yeah. So
one of the reasons that I focus on this occult versus magic dichotomy here is primarily that this may be mostly an American thing. Okay, so I would certainly expect it to be an American thing. As well, let's be frank, we're not a civilized society yet.
Yeah.
Okay, it very often happens in history that powerful barbarian societies close to a dying empire will pick up a veneer of civilization from that dying empire and kind of ape it. That's the United States. Okay, that's simply what we are.
Possibly, arguably, kind of Western society.
Oh no, Western society. We're sitting in an imperial capital here.
Yeah.
Okay, we're sitting in a capital that ruled a quarter of the planet not that long ago. Okay, and so this if you want to refer to European Western society as decadent, I certainly won't argue. But no, we're yes, but we're on our side. We're barbarians. We really are. You get outside of the urban, the coastal urban cores, and it is a very different world. I highly recommend doing that. I actually lived in the Appalachians for 9 years, in an old mill town where all the jobs went away in the 1970s, and it was an education. It was really, because growing up in Seattle, I had this very, very very bi-coastal, very cosmopolitan education, and coming into a place where everybody practices folk magic, and everybody, it was mentioned that I was a Freemason in America, although I believe not here. There is a women's body called the Order of the Eastern Star, to which Masons and women connected to them belong. And there we are sitting in the room after the meeting with the coffee and the obligatory coffee and cookies and things. And there are these two Eastern Star ladies learnedly discussing the right way to make what we would call a poppet, and they called a doll baby. Okay, you want to get rid of a boyfriend. You take the doll baby, you dress it in clothes appropriate, and baptize him, and you mail it to the town of Hell, Michigan. General delivery. Now you know a powerful hoodoo spell that I picked up in the Oh yeah. Well, actually, in the African American community, back in the day, they always used to send them to Paris, because that was the place where Black Americans went to get away from Jim Crow, because France had much more open attitudes toward people of color. So they would send the doll baby to Paris, and that would have probably a little more positive in its intention than mailing it to Hell, Michigan. But yeah, so
in terms of occultism, then the sensitivity. Sorry, this is just me.
No, go ahead, please, obsess.
So in terms of what you're talking about in occultism, right, and sensitizing oneself and paying attention. Quite an important part of this ritual. The Hell doesn't matter. The Paris doesn't matter. It's like you post it. It's sending it. It's the mail service.
Exactly.
The signifier.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean?
Exactly. But also, dressing the doll baby and baptizing the doll baby, and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, it's an expression of intention, and it's classic American folk magic.
Wow, I like that. That's
yeah,
great.
but so my point here is simply, it is a very different world over there, and one of those things. So, but to cycle all the way back to where I was going before I started this exceedingly long divagation, not a problem. It was my doing, not yours. One of the reasons I stress this difference between magic and occultism the way I do is that an enormous amount of the American occult scene has taken to ceremonial magic the way you would expect a bunch of Visigoths and Huns to take it up. It's, we can hit things, okay? And they do. It's all, the universe will tremble before my will! It doesn't work very well. It doesn't work very well at all, as they don't cultivate the sensitivity, and so it's just a mess. And so I do tend to say there are subtler ways of doing this. There are ways that involve more receptivity, more attentiveness, less brute force. There are more ways to get through a door than ramming it repeatedly with your head. Okay, other questions before I go on? Go ahead.
What would you say the hallmarks are of a good magical or occult system? Since you've studied so many.
I've studied a number of them. Well, the difficulty here is that we know so little about what's actually going on in the world of magic and occultism. We know so little we don't know how it works. People will come up with theories. There are a lot of those. We don't actually know how it works. We don't know that much about the cosmos. I know Richard Dawkins will show up and yell at me any day now, but we don't, okay? So what I typically do, rather than having some kind of theoretical framework, is I look at the people who come out of the system, and I say, do I want to be like this person? And if the answer is, if I meet somebody who has been trained in a given system, I say, wow, that's a really neat person. That's an interesting person. I would like to be more like that person. You better believe I'm going to study it. If the person has a kind of creepy, sticky vibe, and we can get into that sometime. The Not So Great Beast is I'm not a fan. I
It just makes me wonder why so many people gravitate towards.
I apologize to any Thelemites here, okay? It's not that. I'm not a fan. Okay, I'm not a fan at all. But, but somebody who has this sort of creepy, sticky, sleazy vibe, as so many people do in certain corners of the community, I look at that and say, whatever you did, I'm not doing it. Well, in some cases, it's whatever you're doing, I'm doing that. So that's generally how I judge it. And so far, it's served me fairly well. I don't know, there are people who consider me exceedingly creepy, but that's largely for political reasons. We don't have to get into that. Somebody else down here had a question. You had a question, yes.
This is a less serious question.
I'm good.
It's about Star Wars.
About Star Wars.
Star Wars.
Star Wars, okay.
Yeah. So, what do you think of, Star Wars? And we were talking about the life force.
The life
and the fact that there's a force.
The force will be
but you
with
have a dark and a light side. You have this kind of balance. The two always have to exist with each other.
You realize that what they're actually talking about is duct tape. There's a dark side and a light side. It holds the galaxy together. Yeah. That's the true secret of the Force. Okay. Now,
what do you think about it? And who would you choose as a role model from the Star Wars?
I want to draw a very, very important distinction here. Actually, before I do so, I just want to make sure J.K. Rowling isn't here, okay? Okay, she isn't here? Okay, good. Because I'm going to be saying some rude things about the Harry Potter books. Okay? But we're going to start with a few rude things about Star Wars. The first movie, okay, quote, A New Hope, the one that I stood in line 7 times to see in its original run in Seattle, Washington. Did you ever notice that the stuff that Obi-Wan does in that movie actually is within the range of possibility? I promise you can confuse the mind, the thoughts of the simple-minded person. People do it all the time. Advertising functions for that reason. Not being seen when you don't want to be seen, that's something you can do. Getting very good at swordsmanship, and maybe even seeing something, being able to block something you can't really see. Martial artists learn that all the time. That's all realistic. Once that hit the big time, and of course at that point the pseudo-skeptic movement was getting going, immediately they slammed all the way over into levitating spaceships out of swamps. Which you can't do, I'm sorry. I hope I'm not breaking anyone's heart here. You cannot levitate a spaceship out of a swamp using the power of your mind. I know, everyone's going...
I tried.
You try. It's not a perfect definition, but I rather like Dion Fortune's definition of magic as the art and science of causing changes in consciousness in accordance with will. Okay? Most of what magic does is work with consciousness. So that's what was going on in the first Star Wars movie. I watched the next 2 once each. I haven't seen the others. They were tacky. I know. I certainly haven't watched any of the more recent stuff. But the original movie was fun. Obviously, they're the only possible role model is Obi-Wan, and Alec Guinness is fun anyway. But as an impressionable teen, sitting through those 7 things, I did practice repetitively trying to get a Darth Vader voice. All this kind of stuff. But it's one of the
Still got it.
Yeah, the shadows of one's insufficiently misspent youth. But that's really as far as Star Wars is concerned. The original one is potentially useful as pointing to some things that can actually happen, and the rest of it, in an esoteric sense, is crap.
Do you think there's a balance though? Like in the films, there's you have to have the light and the dark side, and
what depends?
You use those to achieve a balance in the universe.
I'm going to quote that distant memory Professor Jode. What do you mean by light and dark? Well, if you want to take human moral concepts, and the human moral concepts of a particular society at that, and insist that these things are universal constants that must be weirdly balanced to make the world, I think you have your head in a biologically improbable location. Okay? If you're going to take that as simply in the sense of there are, for example, expansive and contractive forces, there is energy and limitation, there is yin and yang, that's quite another matter. But I would argue that ethics are very important, but ethics are a human creation. They're not a cosmic thing. They're simply the rules we've more or less established to enable people to get along together, and they're always contested and always in need of renegotiation. Okay, they're not cosmic forces, and the attempt to project our moral beliefs into the cosmos is absolutely typical of the Piscian age. That's that very Piscean consciousness of trying to see everything in terms of these opposed, competing forces. And by my calculation, by the calculation of a lot of the old occultists back in the days, the Piscean age ended in 1879. We're in the Aquarian age now. Now this does not, you'll notice a shortage of, what was the thing from the old movie? Sympathy and understanding and all that kind of stuff. You play the thing from Hair. Okay. The people who came up with that did it by smoking way too much weed. That's not an astrological analysis. If you know your astrology, Aquarius is not bliss and love and light. If you know any Aquarians, you know Aquarius is not bliss and love and light. Okay. I have a fair Aquarius moderately strongly placed in my chart, and I know that. But it's time for us to start letting go of that insistence on imposing binary oppositions on the cosmos and assuming that these products of our own overheated brains are primary cosmic powers. In that way, the whole Star Wars thing falls flat on its nose. Because this entire notion that there are some people who are good people and some people who are bad people, and the good people are good because they know they're good and they follow this particular set of cliches, and the bad people are deliberately bad. The Lord Moldywarp types, okay, who have no reason to exist except to give the good guys somebody that they can hate and fear and despise and still feel good about themselves. The cult of mandatory niceness in the late Piscean age is a very toxic thing. We all have angry emotions. We all hate things. That's normal. I once published an essay called Hate is the New Sex, pointing out that attitudes toward hate right now in modern Western cultures are the same as the attitude toward sex in the Victorian period. If you want to label a group as absolutely unacceptable, you call it a hate group. If you want to describe words as things you cannot speak, things that are utterly obscene, you call it hate speech. Okay? Whereas, 150 years ago, it was anything having to do with that kind of thing. Reference being to sex, of course. And so, the consequences are infinitely predictable. We will eventually, just as we had a sexual revolution, we are risking having a revolution of hate, where people are going to embrace hate and wallow in the streets, proving as usual that the opposite of one bad idea is another bad idea. You laugh. I recommend try that one.
The pendulum always swings.
The pendulum always swings. And it clunks us from one side, it clunks us for the other.
You kind of got me thinking, because I research a lot of Kabbalah, and I'm going through your paths of wisdom, which is...
Well, thank you very much. That path of...
But what I'm finding is the left-hand pillar is no more worthy, for lack of a better, than the right-hand pillar.
You can't have a tree without both. Exactly. And the pillar of form is simply a pillar of restriction and limitation. Oh, there's a word you can't say in some spiritual circles. Limitation. Ooh, that's creepy. We can't have that. We have to get rid of all of our limits. Well, right now those chairs are the only thing limiting your buttocks propensity to bounce off the floor. We can all be grateful for those limits. I will not go into any detail about the limits imposed by such things as sphincters. Well, never mind. Limits are good. Okay, in their place, that pillar of form is very beneficial to us all. So once again, you can go to extremes on either side. I really like the Kabbalistic teaching that the clip-off kind of line both sides, and if you go outside the tree on either end, guess what? You're in their territory. Whereas you keep closer to the middle pillar, you keep closer to the place of balance and harmony. Okay? So, there's a question way in the back. Go ahead.
Yes, I missed a few words. You made an interesting comment in regards to Star Wars a few moments back where you said magic and then something. consciousness.
Oh, I was quoting Dion Fortune's definition of magic. The magic is the art and science of causing change in consciousness in accordance with will. Okay. Now, that's a sneakier definition than it sounds like. It doesn't say whose consciousness is being changed, nor does it say whose will is involved. You can take that definition and apply it to hardcore Christian mysticism, and it works. You know, because in Christian mysticism, it's the will is the divine will, and you're changing your consciousness to align it with the divine will. I'm not a Christian mystic, but I have read Evelyn Underhill, and that's certainly her description. Okay. You're welcome. Let's see, other questions.
Are pictures of the lecture okay?
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay.
It's open. Well, I mean, look, there is a camera.
Is in the different books, does it matter which way round? Do you have to start with one and then do
This adds to the confusion. Okay, the three way books, the three manuals, the Way of the Golden Section, the Way of the Four Elements, the Way of the Secret Temple. Those need to be done in sequence. So you start with the Way of the Golden Section, and you also need a copy of the Sacred Geometry Oracle with that, so you can work with that. Those ones you do in sequence. The other three, the three workbooks, you do anytime, in any order. So it kind of worked out that way. I was not planning on causing annoyance and frustration to my readers, but doubtless there was some people. I have had people email me saying, "But what order am I supposed to do them in?" So, yeah. So, I'll bounce. I was going to comment. I'm really glad that Paths of Wisdom remains as popular as it is. What happened with Paths of Wisdom is simply that when I was in full spate of my Golden Dawn phase, a few years ago now, it was very annoying to me that there was not a book like that. Dion Fortune's The Mystical Kabbalah is a wonderful book, but it doesn't cover the paths.
No, it doesn't.
And there are some other aspects of it that I didn't find especially useful, and some things that I thought should be included.
Which is why I picked it, because I'm heavy into path work.
Yeah.
Which I have a follow-on question, slightly off topic.
Give me just a moment to finish this, and then we
no
can toss that. Gareth Knight's Practical Guide to Kabbalistic Symbolism is a very interesting book, but it is idiosyncratic. It is one of his earlier books, I believe. And it has a lot of material borrowed from Scientology, which did not really turn my crank. And also he liked Crowley's rearrangement of the paths on the tree, which I don't find useful. Again, apologies to any Thelemites in the house. But I don't. So it was between those and half a dozen other less developed books on the Kabbalah that led me to finally, got me into a sufficient swivet that I sat down and started working on Paths of Wisdom, and to my own surprise found that I could get it published, and that was all she wrote. But you had a follow-on question.
Yeah, into the deeper mysticism of Kabbalah.
Mm-hmm.
Can you guide me towards any deeper studies on the Shem HaMephorash?
Yeah, you're probably going to have to do it the old-fashioned way by making contact with the relevant angels.
Roger. Gotcha.
This should open. There we go. Okay.
You're talking like D style.
You could do that. You could do that, or there are also meditative practices. There's a lot of, working with angels is tolerably easy because you don't have to worry so much about protective things. They're not going to hurt you, unlike some spirits. But so you can work with them in a meditative or contemplative fashion and get very good results that way. But that way, back in the Renaissance, some of the old books actually say that any grimoire that's more than 40 years old is like does anyone even remember telephone directories anymore? Okay. It's like a telephone directory that's 40 years out of date. It's not going to do you much good. So Pietro de Albano says, the only way to actually know what spirits to summon, how to summon them, is to figure it out for yourself, and you do that by making contact with your guardian genius or holy guardian angel and getting the goods from the source. So I know that's a very unpopular thing to suggest today at a time when grimoires are extremely popular, but that's what Ivano said, and I think he probably knew more about the subject than the rest of us. So, sure. Any other questions?
Kinda, yeah. Sort of allied. You don't like Crowley much, like fair. I'm wondering how you feel about his kind of correspondences and tables of correspondences, like 777.
Well, 777 was only very partly his work.
Sure.
It was mostly McGregor Mathers and I believe Alan Bennett who put that together, and then of course Crowley
Claim credit.
Claim credit, and added a few things by himself and claim credit. Having some sense of correspondences is a good thing. Taking it to that kind of elephantine scale, not necessarily. I don't know that it was actually that useful.
That's a good answer. I'm generally interested. You know, I would imagine then, to my naive point of view, then the kind of art and science of occultism is discovering these correspondences, however you choose to discover them. And there are ways that easier and worse ways. I guess it's all very personal.
And it should be very personal. One of the problems with a lot of this sort of canned correspondence thing is that not all correspondences work with all people.
I'm not a massive fan of Crowley, but like I find him like I'm not a massive fan of anyone.
Okay.
Right. But I find everybody's work and everybody's like art form interesting, right? Because the correspondences that get drawn are correspondences, and they're always interesting, even if I like don't agree with them. Like there's something in there of like, but you do, you know. So what am I missing here? Or, you know, what's going on? You know. So like this. I just wondered.
No, it's a little like reading novels. A good novel presents, because what a novel is basically it's giving you a look at the thinking of the writer. You're actually looking inside the person's head, and so when you read a novel, you're learning how they think about the world, and it may be compatible with the way you think about the world. It may be not. You may find it actually rather repellent, but one way or another, you understand more about what it means to be human by the time you finish that novel. If you finish it and just don't throw it against the far wall. So yeah, I can see approaching correspondences on that way. I've simply, again, this may be simply a function of our barbarian culture back over in the savage wasteland of the United States, but I've seen a lot of people treat the correspondences as the be-all and end-all, where you have to memorize reams of this stuff.
Literal.
Yeah, and that is what will open to you the gate of I don't know what, because it doesn't seem to have benefited the teachers.
I think he kind of quite like confusing people.
Well,
definitely did.
Crowley, yeah. Well,
I kind of said I'd like to give the benefit of the doubt. Going, it's not a bad thing to be confused because it makes you think. It doesn't make it easier, but like this stuff is about complicated thought and perception. And perception, if you really want to try and perceive, is not linear paths.
No, that's true. That's true. That's true.
So maybe this is helpful. That's just my spin on it.
Other questions? Okay, in that case I'm going to go on into a little bit of a broader perspective on this. I want to talk a bit about my teacher John Gilbert and about the various traditions that he passed on to me and that I have been trying to pass on in various ways, many of them involving things that you can freely download on the internet. Since most of these things are not things I invented, well, none of the stuff I got from John obviously, they're not things that I feel I have any right to hold on to. And so I released most of them under Creative Commons licenses. He was an odd duck. He was a school teacher in several American states. He ended up living in Colorado at a time when there was a kind of a waning old-fashioned occult community in the Boulder, Denver, Colorado area. And what had started as about half a dozen entirely unconnected organizations had gradually fallen in on itself until you had one quiet little storefront in a suburb of Denver, where on Sundays the Universal Gnostic Church held services, and I think Fridays was when the Ancient Order of Druids in America met, and his Golden Dawn offshoot, and that's a story all in itself. They were on, I think, on Tuesdays, and so on. Each of them, but it was the same storefront, and it was the same people. Everyone was there. There was a little bit of overlap, a little bit of distinction, but mostly it was the same people. By the time I ended up stumbling across this group of people, there were fewer than a dozen of them left. In John's time, there were more than that. Dr. Juliet Ashley, who was his main teacher, and Matthew William Shaw, aka Rodon Staros, if you know bad Greek, that's a slightly garbled way of saying Rose Cross. Those two were kind of the main figures in the scene at that time. John studied with both of them, and from them inherited the various orders that had landed in their lap as all of this thing sort of folded in on itself, and he ended up as very nearly the last man standing. I encountered him, we corresponded a bit before we actually met for the first time in 2001, and he was the pretty much what there was left of the Universal Gnostic Church and the Order of Spiritual Alchemy and the Ancient Order of Druids in America and the Modern Order of Essenes and one of the various holy orders of the Golden Dawn, and a couple of other things. Just one of those. This is something that happens fairly often in failing occult scenes. It would not surprise me. I don't know how your neo-pagan scene is doing in this country. In the United States, it's kind of in a nosedive. And it would not surprise me if down the road a bit you will find, people who are somebody who is the last, Colorado exponent of Gardnerian and Alexandrian and Elgard and Fairy Wicca. Through this same kind of encounter, John, that's how I encountered this gallimaufry of occult teachings, in which the way of the secret temple, the entire Golden Section Fellowship system, is derived from that. John had this expansive idea that his students would eventually take this material and reformat it to pursue their own, and he had a few people who made some kind of attempt at doing that. I was mostly in those days focused on keeping the Ancient Order of Druids in America from dying. It was very close to death when I broke out the shock paddles and started, doing the Dr. Frankenstein routine until the hand finally stirred. But I received initiation in all these things because it had become standard in the last decades of these things for everybody to cross-initiate. And so I found myself, going through a ceremony of consecration as a Gnostic bishop, which was not something on my bucket list. And being initiated into his very idiosyncratic Golden Dawn offshoot. And so on and so forth, receiving each of these things in the course of working with him. And all of them have, they all have a very idiosyncratic way of thinking about the Tree of Life. I have a book on that which will be out shortly. It is not the standard Golden Dawn version. It is not the standard French version. I've never seen it anywhere else. I can go into some of the details if anyone's interested. Otherwise, you wait till the book's available, it will doubtless be in this store very soon. The title is Revisioning the Tree of Life, in case you're taking notes. But all of his systems have this focus that I've described as occult rather than magical. His version of the Golden Dawn actually came by way of Arthur Edward Waite's version. At least that's the story. The official narrative, now we all know that Golden Dawn origin stories are absolutely true. Nobody faked anything, right? Okay, yeah. So I have no idea if this happened or not, but this is what I was told. Dr. Juliet Ashley, who was a rich divorcee. She married a much older man. He ended up a very, very wealthy man. He ended up taking up with a chorus girl. She sued for divorce, ended up set for life, and pursued her interest in occultism. She was a student of Manly P. Hall. She was a student of Edgar Cayce. She was a student of various, and she ended up traveling to Zurich for a few years as she was getting into psychology to study with some of the students of Carl Jung. This was in the late 1930s. Come the spring of 1939, she looked at what was going on in the world and said, I think it's time to get back to the United States. And so she bailed out of Zurich and headed for home by way of England, where the claim is she stopped with Arthur Edward Waite and talked him into giving her a charter, not for the order he was running in those days, the Fraternity of the Rose Cross, but for his earlier Holy Order of the Golden Dawn. Now, exactly what happened, again, I don't know. It is interesting to note she didn't act on that charter until he was dead a couple of years later. Okay, so she may have just made it up out of whole cloth, but she did have, just as Waite dropped the ritual magic from his order. she did the same thing. The Holy Order of the Golden Dawn, it had a basic protective ritual filling the same role as the lesser ritual of Pentagram, but it was a different ritual. It's called the Sphere of Protection. And then there were the initiations, which she had completely reworked. Although again, they have some relation to Waite's rituals, which I've actually witnessed. So I'm kind of reconnecting to the tradition there. And so that came down. I ended up. It's far enough from the Golden Dawn that I ended up changing the name when I republished it. I had to, because I'd taken an obligation not to reveal the secret signs and passwords and all this kind of stuff. I had to come up with new secret signs and passwords anyway. So I renamed it the Fellowship of the Hermetic Rose. And if you go looking for that, you will find places where you can download the whole thing quite readily. And if so, have fun with it. What, does anyone have a final question? And make it silly, please.
Have you been to the Mason Lodge in Holborn?
I haven't been to. No, I haven't had. The United Grand Lodge of England. Years ago. 20.
You haven't been in your recent trip then?
No, I haven't been there recently. No. I am an active Mason in the United States, where, by the way, most Freemasons are construction workers and plumbers and things.
Same here.
It's a very different world.
So what do you do in the political world?
What do I do in the political world?
Are you active in the political world?
What I do in the political world is annoy people. I wrote a book called The King in Orange, which any of you who know your Lovecraftian references will catch one of those. It's attempting to explain why Donald Trump or someone like him was inevitable. Okay, that doesn't mean good, but it does mean, given the policies that were pursued for 50 years up to his time, something like him was going to happen. And here we are. So yes, what I do in the political world is piss people off.
Mainly on Twitter?
I don't do Twitter. I don't. There's somebody who does Twitter, who relays stuff on Twitter in my name. I have no idea who it is. For all I know, it's the Bavarian Illuminati or something. But
Either one of your trolls.
Yeah, that's very likely. Except they haven't really been nasty about it. So I don't know. But I have my blog. I have my Dream Wits journal. I post stuff on them quite frequently. I deal with tirades and trolls and loud denunciations from all sides. I am not invited either to the left wing or to the right wing science fiction conventions in America, even though I've written quite a bit of science fiction. Everybody finds me objectionable. Notice how much I grieve. And on that note, let us proceed to the book signing.